Roger that. What? You gonna give me orders? Yes, sir. Armed and ready. This better be good. Been waiting on you. 10-4. Who wants some? By the numbers, boys. Sure thing. You gonna give me orders? Armed and ready. Sure. Who wants some? Been waiting on you. Can't wait. Go, go, go! This better be good. Why not? Roger that. By the numbers, boys. Yes, sir. Will do. Can't wait. Orders received. Oh yeah, who wants some? You gonna give me orders? Been waiting on. Armed and ready. Aye, aye, sir. That's fine. Of course. Looking forward to it. By the numbers, boys. You gonna give me orders? Sure thing. Outstanding. This better be good. Who wants some? Oh yeah. That's fine. Roger that. Go, go, go! Orders received. Sure thing. Can't wait. Go, go, go! I'm on it. Will do. Why not? That's fine. Been waiting. You gonna give me orders? Gangway. Coming through. Outstanding. Can't wait. Go, go, go! Aye, aye. Oh, yeah. Keep your shit out, Spuddy. You can... Armed and ready. I feel it. Aye, aye, sir. Keep your shirt out. Who wants some? By the numbers, boys. Can't wait. Go, go, go! Will do. Sure thing. Outstanding. Who wants some? I feel it. You got it. Armed and ready. Outstanding. Keep your shirt out. Sure. Sure thing. You got it. Why not? That's fine. Shirt out, Spuddy. Gangway, coming through. I'm on it. I feel ya. Will do. 10-4. Oh yeah. Orders received. I'm on it. Roger that. I've been waiting on you. Sure thing. You got it. Armed and ready. Who wants some? Oh yeah. I'm on it. Roger that. Of course. Been waiting on you. Sure. Who wants some? Why not? I feel ya. Can't wait. Got it. I'm on it. By the numbers. You gonna give me order? This better be good. Armed and ready. Sure thing. That's fine. Outstanding. Will do. I feel it. Why not? Orders received. That's fine. Outstanding. Sure. Roger that. Looking forward to it. Aye, shirt on, Sparky. Why not? Gangway, coming through. Booyah! Sure thing. That's fine. Roger that. You got it. I feel you. Of course. Orders received. 10-4. Looking forward to it. Can't wait. Will do. I'm on it. Of course. Outstanding. Can't wait. Looking forward to it. Yes, sir. Will do. That's fine. Got it. Oh, yeah. You got it. Affirmative. Go, go, go! Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Got it. Oh, yeah. Sure. You got it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Will do. Affirmative. Sure thing. You got it. Go, go, go! Keep your shirt on, Sparky. That's fine. Outstanding. Affirmative. 10-4. Of course. Let's do this. Why not? I'm on it. 10-4. Outstanding. Gangway, coming through. Got it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Oh, yeah. Will do. Got it. You got it. Looking forward to it. 10-4. Roger that. Oh, yeah. Go, go, go! I'm on it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Got it. Can't wait. Outstanding. I'm on it. 10-4. Orders received. I feel ya. Aye, aye. Affirmative. Go, go, go! Can't wait. Got it. Sure thing. Gangway, coming through. I'm on it. Orders received. Will do. I feel ya. Looking forward to it. 10-4. Sure. Orders received. Keep your shirt on. Roger that. Sure thing. Aye, aye. You got it. Gangway, coming through. Oh, yeah. Will do. Yes, sir. Orders received. I'm on it. Got it. Aye, aye, sir. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Sure. Will do. Outstanding. I feel it. I'm on it. Outstanding. Affirmative. Go, go, go! Gangway, coming through. Go, go, go! How's that? Outstanding. 10-4. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Can't wait. Sure thing. Gangway, coming through. I feel it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Roger that. Of course. 10-4. Gangway, coming through. You got it. Orders received. 10-4. Got it. Oh, yeah. Gangway, coming through. I feel ya. Yes, sir. Why not? Got it. That's fine. Affirmative. Will do. Yes, sir. You got it. Of course. That's fine. Aye, aye, sir. Can't wait. Got it. Orders received. Outstanding. 10-4. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Why not? You got it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. That's fine. Yes, sir. Sure. Orders received. Go, go, go! Affirmative. You got it. Sure thing. Looking forward to it. Roger that. That's fine. Outstanding. I feel you. Aye, aye, sir. Why not? Got it. Yes, sir. Affirmative. That's fine. Of course. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Why not? Aye, aye, sir. Go, go, go! Orders received. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Looking forward to it. Booyah! Affirmative. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Roger that. You got it. Yes, sir. 10-4. I feel ya. Aye, aye, sir. Outstanding. Of course. Gangway. Coming through. Why not? Sure. That's fine. Outstanding. Orders received. 10-4. Why not? Sure. Sure thing. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Looking forward to it. Of course. Outstanding. Go, go, go! Affirmative. Roger that. I feel ya. Orders received. Gangway, coming through. Why not? Die, die, die. Been waiting on you. I feel ya. Go, go, go! Booyah! That's fine. Can't wait. Of course. Yes, sir. Why not? Roger that. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. I feel ya. Will do. Sure thing. Got it. Affirmative. Looking forward to it. Roger that. That's fine. Booyah! Sure thing. Of course. Can't wait. 10-4. Go, go, go! I feel ya. That's fine. You got it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. 10-4. Looking forward to it. affirmative. I feel you. Orders received. Gangway, coming through. Got it. That's fine. I'm on it. Outstanding. I feel you. Orders received. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Yes, sir. 10-4. Oh, yeah. Sure thing. Go, go, go! Outstanding. Aye, aye, sir. Looking forward to it. Booyah! That's fine. Yes, sir. Roger that. You got it. Will do. Get some. Sure thing. Orders received. Can't wait. Yes, sir. Why not? Can't wait. 10-4. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Of course. Got it. That's fine. Gangway, coming through. Will do. Sure thing. Yes, sir. Gangway, coming through. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. I'm on it. Looking forward to it. Sure. 10-4. Outstanding. I'm on it. Yes, sir. Give me some. Roger that. Yeah. Go, go, go! 10-4. Aye, aye, sir. Gangway, coming through. Go, go, go! Bring it! 10-4. I feel ya. Oh, yeah. Roger that. Got it. That's fine. Gangway, coming through. I'm on it. Orders received. Of course. Will do. 10-4. Yes, sir. Looking forward to it. Go, go, go! I'm on it. Can't wait. Why not? Outstanding. Gangway, coming through. Got it. 10-4. That's fine. Aye, aye, sir. Go, go, go! I'm on it. Sure thing. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. 10-4. I feel it. Can't wait. That's fine. Sure thing. You got it. Gangway, coming through. I'm on it. 10-4. Roger that. That's fine. I feel ya. Looking forward to it. Will do. I feel ya. Aye, aye, sir. Go, go, go! Sure. Will do. Can't wait. Roger that. Sure thing. Orders received. I feel ya. That's fine. You got it. I'm on it. Looking forward to it. 10-4. Got it. Gangway, coming through. Outstanding. Of course. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Why not? Sure thing. Got it. I feel it. Got it. You got it. Looking forward to it. Sure thing. Die. Got it. Yes, sir. Roger that. Sure. Why not? That's fine. You got it. Got it. Sure thing. Go. Outstanding. Yes, sir. Of course. Go. Gangway, coming through. Orders received. That's fine. Looking forward to it. 10-4. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Of course. I feel you. Oh, yeah. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Can't wait. You got it. Gangway, coming through. Orders received. Oh, yeah. Aye, sir. Shirt on, Sparky. Oh, yeah. Got it. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Sure. Shirt on, Sparky. Roger that. Orders received. Of course. Got it. Why not? Will do. I feel ya. Outstanding. Yes, sir. You got it. Roger that. Aye, sir. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Looking forward to it. That's fine. Roger that. Got it. Orders received. Oh, yeah. Sure. Sure thing. Can't wait. I'm on it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Why not? Of course. You got it. Oh, yeah. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Roger that. Aye, sir. Looking forward to it. Why not? That's fine. Looking forward to it. I'm on it. Roger that. Affirmative. Sure thing. Looking forward to it. That's fine. You got it. Will do. Of course. Why not? Looking forward to it. Roger that. Aye, sir. Sure. Outstanding. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Will do. I feel ya. Of course. Orders received. Gangway, coming through. Affirmative. Can't wait. Got it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Sure thing. Roger that. Aye, sir. Outstanding. I feel ya. That's fine. Can't wait. Oh, yeah. Orders received. 10-4. Outstanding. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Got it. Aye, shirt on, Sparky. Looking forward to it. Sure thing. Affirmative. Aye, aye. Yes, sir. Sure. Go, go, go! Will do. Gangway, coming through. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. That's fine. 10-4. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Sure. You got it. Aye, aye. Go, go, go! Outstanding. Why not? That's fine. Will do. Sure. Die, die, die. Give me some. Sure thing. You got it. Ah. Yes, sir. Looking forward to it. I feel ya. Of course. 10-4. I'm on it. That's fine. Yes, sir. Aye, aye, sir. Can't wait. 10-4. Gangway, coming through. Affirmative. Will do. That's fine. Roger that. You got it. Outstanding. I feel ya. Go, go, go! Sure thing. Of course. 10-4. Why not? Yes, sir. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. That's fine. Looking forward to it. Orders received. Sure thing. Sure. That's fine. Outstanding. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. 10-4. Sure thing. Affirmative. Will do. Can't wait. Outstanding. Roger that. Gangway, coming through. Sure thing. Roger that. Why not? Aye, aye, sir. You got it. I feel ya. Go, go, go! Outstanding. Sure thing. Gangway, coming through. Aye, aye. Roger that. Will do. Yes, sir. Gangway, coming through. Roger that. I feel ya. Orders received. Outstanding. Aye, aye, sir. Looking forward to it. Go, go, go! Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Why not? Roger that. That's fine. Gangway, coming through. Of course. Got it. I feel ya. You got it. 10-4. I'm on it. Aye, aye. I feel ya. Orders received. Looking forward to it. Of course. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. Sure. You got it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Outstanding. Looking forward to it. You got it. I'm on it. Will do. Affirmative. Why not? Outstanding. Sure thing. Can't wait. I'm on it. I feel it. Oh, yeah. Can't wait. Affirmative. Got it. Go, go, go! 10-4. You got it. Aye, aye. Affirmative. Roger that. I feel ya. Why not? sir. Affirmative. Go, go, go! Of course. Can't wait. Gangway, coming through. Why not? Sure. 10-4. Oh, yeah. Sure thing. You got it. 10-4. Gangway, coming through. I'm on it. That's fine. 10-4. Looking forward to it. Got it. I feel ya. Sure. Affirmative. Gangway, coming through. Orders received. Of course. Will do. Orders received. Roger that. I'm on it. Why not? Can't wait. I feel ya. Go, go, go! Outstanding. Sure. Gangway, coming through. That's fine. Why not? Aye, aye, sir. Booyah! Can't wait. Affirmative. Orders received. Go, go, go! I feel ya. That's fine. Looking forward to it. You got it. Will do. I'm on it. 10-4. Sure thing. Of course. Sure it out, Sparky. I'm on it. Can't wait. Why not? Sure thing. That's fine. Will do. Outstanding. Got it. Can't wait. Orders received. 10-4. Yes, sir. Sure thing. Sure. I'm on it. 10-4. Will do. Looking forward to it. Orders received. Sure thing. Aye, aye. Why not? You got it. I'm on it. Oh, yeah. Gangway, coming through. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Can't wait. That's fine. I'm on it. Got it. I feel it. Can't wait. That's fine. I'm on it. Looking forward to it. Affirmative. Gangway, coming through. Got it. Of course. Roger that. Outstanding. Aye, aye, sir. I feel ya. Affirmative. 10-4. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Looking forward to it. That's fine. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Roger that. Outstanding. Orders received. Why not? Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Oh, yeah. I'm on it. Roger that. Gangway, coming through. You got it. Of course. Roger that. Why not? Gangway, coming through. Got it. Orders received. Go, go, go! Oh, yeah. Gangway, coming through. Sure thing. I feel ya. Aye, aye, sir. 10-4. Of course. Orders received. Gangway, coming through. Aye, aye, sir. Orders received. Sure thing. Of course. Orders received. Why Why not? Oh yeah. Yes, sir. Aye, aye, sir. I'm on it. You got it. Aye, aye, sir. Outstanding. Can't wait. I feel ya. You got it. Why not? 10 more. Looking forward to it. Of course. Got it. You got it. Can't wait. Gangway, coming through. Yes, sir. Looking forward to it. Sure. Sure thing. Oh, yeah. Gangway, coming through. I'm on it. Will do. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Outstanding. Of course. Looking forward to it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Oh, yeah. You got it. Got it. Why not? Of course. Sure. You got it. Will do. Aye, aye. Got it. Outstanding. Sure. Why not? Will do. Go, go, go! Affirmative. Looking forward to it. You got it. Affirmative. Oh, yeah. Yes, sir. Roger that. Why not? Aye, aye, sir. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. I feel ya. Sure. Of course. Looking forward to it. Roger that. Gangway, coming through. That's fine. Oh, yeah. Go, go, go! Affirmative. Sure thing. I feel ya. Sure. Can't wait. Roger that. Will do. Outstanding. Go, go, go! Will do. Aye, aye, sir. Gangway, coming through. Got it. Go, go, go! That's fine. I'm on it. Why not? Sure. You got it. Go, go, go! Can't wait. Oh, yeah. Roger that. Aye, aye, sir. Of course. Will do. Aye, aye, sir. Why not? Will do. Can't wait. 10-4. Why not? Will do. Affirmative. Orders received. Can't wait. You got it. Aye, aye, sir. Sure. Go, go, go! Can't wait. Yes, sir. Roger that. Gangway, coming through. Why not? Will do. Outstanding. Yes, sir. That's fine. Orders received. 10-4. Oh, yeah. Looking forward to it. Will do. Gangway, coming through. Sure. Looking forward to it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Aye, aye, sir. Orders received. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Go, go, go! Sure thing. That's fine. Orders received. Got it. Gangway, coming through. Of course. Looking forward to it. Can't wait. on, Sparky. Gangway, coming through. That's fine. Yes, sir. Looking forward to it. Oh, yeah. Roger that. 10-4. That's fine. 10-4. Aye, aye, sir. Got it. Oh, yeah. Orders received. You got it. Roger that. Yes, sir. Sure thing. Will do. Go, go, go! Yes, sir. You got it. Why not? Got it. Orders received. That's fine. You got it. Affirmative. Of course. Sure. Looking forward to it. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. Oh, yeah. Go, go, go! Of course. Will do. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. 10-4. Go, go, go! Aye, aye, sir. Sure. I feel ya. Will do. Aye, aye, sir. Got it. Will do. That's fine. Looking forward to it. Yes, sir. Aye, aye, sir. I'm on it. Sure thing. Keep your shirt on, Sparky. I'm on it. I feel ya. Affirmative. Sure. Aye, aye, sir. I'm on it. Will do. Outstanding. Yes, sir. Sure thing. Go, go, go! Outstanding. Oh, yeah. Go, go, go! Orders received. Looking forward to it. Got it. Of course. Yes, sir. Gangway, coming through. You got it. Go, go, go! Can't wait. Will do. Sure. Looking forward to it. Why not? Gangway, coming through. Outstanding. Orders received. Of course. Go, go, go! Sure thing. Aye, aye, sir. Gangway, coming through. Why not? Will do. Outstanding. Got it. I feel ya. That's fine. Sure. Sure thing. Aye, aye, sir. I'm on it. Affirmative. That's fine. Oh, yeah. Gangway, coming.
Victory unlocked.